This is the Truth Network.
Hidden treasures of the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Oh, I just love Lamed verses. A little play on words there. The letter Lamed has to do with loving and learning, and so I just really love it. And the verse 12 of the 6th chapter of Song of Solomon is the Lamed verse, and I think there's much to learn and much to love here. Very mysterious verse, translated differently, but what really is different is the way it's interpreted, so we'll get into it. In English, it reads, "Or ever," and this is the King James Version, "or ever I was aware, my soul made me like the chariots of Amminadib," or Amminadib, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So, again, one of the questions you wonder is who is speaking here? And after careful, and I think it's important to note what the Jews believe about this verse, study of what Rashi's commentary is on this, I think I finally understand what he is saying here. And again, this is my interpretation of Rashi, and again, it's in show notes if you want to read it for yourself. But what he's saying is that the Jesus character in verse 11 had gone down into the nuts. In other words, he was going to see the fruit of what the Jews had been doing. Whether or not they had budded, and whether, just like Jesus would, go look at, inspect fruit. That's his interpretation of 11. It is the King Solomon, or the Prince of Peace, that's doing that. And then verse 12, he believed, was the Jews who had not been producing the right kind of fruit and had gone awry. And the way he interprets this is that my soul was not aware that I'd been made to be a chariot for the nations. In other words, people were riding on the Jews for the blessing that they would bring rather than the Jews bringing a light to the world. And, the nations were taking advantage of the Jews, and what he was talking about there is during the exile, and very specifically, he was talking about how the Greeks would take advantage of the Jews and how the Romans would take advantage of the Jews. And so that's from my standpoint, a kind of depressing way to look at this verse, and it's certainly a challenge when you think about what he's saying. However, when you look at Matthew Henry, he goes completely, the other way, is that this is Jesus coming again looking for fruit, and then he switches to it's she who's saying that she now is finding herself in the chariot with Jesus. And so then there's all those people who feel like it is she that went down, including me. I believe it is her that went down into the garden of nuts, again, to see her pomegranates and all that stuff. And then it says, without me being aware, my soul made me in the chariots of the willing. And the reason why I say that is that word Amminadib, or however you want to pronounce it, Amminadib, is the same word for the Jews that were willing to give up all the gold and silver and all those kind of things back in Exodus, right? That they were, asked to give up this gold and things to make the temple. But when you look at that word carefully, it is a nun and a dalid and a yud and a bet, okay? And I know that may not make sense to you right off the bat, but let me just take the first two letters and spend a minute on those, because I think it's well worth it. The first letter is a nun, and you may know from the 119th Psalm, thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and a nun is very much has to do with faith. As you study the letter, it's a seed we've talked about, but when I think of the letter Nun, I definitely think of the word faithful, because the word faithful is definitely spelled that way with a Nun. And then you take the letter Dalet, which is servant. And so when you put the two together, you're essentially saying Nun, faithful, Dalet, servant. And so what you got is faithful servants, which are those people who are willing, by the way, who bring light for the temple. And that yud is light, and then the bet is the kingdom. So here's the willing servants, here's the faithful servants, well done, good and faithful servant. that are bringing light for the kingdom, okay? And so it's really cool to me, if you look at it and interpret that way, that as we become fruitful, like in the Valley of Nuts, and we saw that, the pomegranates were blossoming. In other words, God prospers us so that we can be faithful servants. In other words, he gives us all this light to share. He gave it to the Jews to share. He gives it to us to share so that we will be willing, right, to share it with those who the things have been stolen, which is the idea of the letter Dalet, is it's someone who things have been stolen, and God's trying to chase them and replace it. And so the idea of a faithful servant would be, again, serving God with all the means that God has given him. And so as I think about this verse, it doesn't happen. Maybe it's happened in your life that you love God, you serve God, you work with God, and the next thing you know, your soul, which is your nefesh, which is what it says, I was not aware, my soul was placed in this chariot. And the idea of a chariot is kind of a transition between space and time, okay? It's like all of a sudden, without me knowing it, I'm being transported into this place of the faithful servants, okay? And all of a sudden I find myself, like I got to pinch myself, that I'm around all these amazingly cool people that are so willing to give them themselves, their time, their energy, their talents. Like, oh my goodness, like yesterday, here I am. I'm just Robbie Dilmore, used to be a car salesman, And the next thing I know, my soul had transported me to be interviewing this girl on Land and Rescue who, her name is Anya, and she's with the church in the Ukraine, and she's been helping thousands of Ukrainians, right? And she was telling stories of all these refugees that would come in. They wouldn't have anything, but because she had been a refugee herself, in the war in 2014, God had given her this unbelievable hope through her salvation. That's just an amazing story. Again, the whole podcast is there at Land and Rescue. That episode, I'm sure, will come up in the next couple of weeks. There's actually 3 episodes we recorded. But as I was sitting there with her, I was just wanting to pinch myself. It's like, how am I in this chariot with this unbelievably faithful servant? I mean, they have worked nonstop for months, feeding and helping, and the stories of the children, right? Because the children have been through all this trauma, seeing all their friends, families killed, being taken out of their homes. You can imagine no food, no shelter, and they come to this place at this church. And the stories we've heard is their children, they haven't smiled in months and months, and children are meant to laugh. And they say a little girl laughs when she's 8 years old around 300 times a day. That's what it was meant to be. But these children hadn't smiled in forever. And so God gave Anna this idea to do sort of a vacation Bible school where they sing and dance and dress up like superheroes. And then they show the real superhero, Jesus, coming in. And the point is that the kids, They start off with the music low and gentle to bring them up, and they slowly increase it until they're all laughing and giggling, and they're being kids again, right? They've taken out them, even though they're just in a warehouse in the war district. They've been transported in the chariots of Amminadib, right? They've been transported in time and place to a place where Jesus is there, and they're among the faithful servants that are rejoicing in who God is, right? And as we think about how our souls have been transported at times into places where time and space don't matter, but we're just among the faithful servants, the willing people who are willing, who care about those people that are hurting and all those other things. So when you think about when we get a chance to go down in and see the fruit that God has allowed in our lives, right? He prospered us. We just planted whatever seeds. He made them grow. And then as we have the seeds of that harvest of what he's given us in our life, our souls are, our souls, the word nefesh again begins with that letter nun, because it's a believing machine. That's what it has to do with faith and light, okay? And so here our believing machines transport us to this place of the faithful servants, right? And I don't know how it all works, but I know I've been there. And I'm going to be there again at a boot camp coming up here in a couple of weeks. And in so many different places, I get to just pinch myself. Even tonight, I'll be with the Band of Brothers, the Masculine Journey. And Wednesday night, I'll be with with the church, and we'll be praying. Every time I'm away, I got to just pinch myself. How did I get transported here to be in this place of the faithful servants? And I'm not disagreeing with Rashi, by the way, that the nation, everything that God made can be corrupted, and that what was meant to be meant for good, undoubtedly Satan tries to corrupt and use in horrible ways. Okay. The point is that, man, can this be corrupted? Just like all the wonderful things of food and sex and all that Satan has corrupted. This idea here of our nefeshes transporting us into the place of the faithful servants can obviously go awry. And so I think it's beautiful how, you can look at these verses yourself and ponder them and think, and then God will give you, what you need for that time. It's like a treasure, right? That when you open it, every time you get something new. And I'm so grateful that you shared it with me today. Thanks for listening.